Hi, my name is Sam, and in this video, I'll be introducing you to Authzed, the platform to store, compute, and validate application permissions. We'll go through the process of setting up a project in Authzed, designing a permission system, and then integrating it into an existing web app. I'll also be explaining some concepts and showing some useful tools along the way. Let's get started. Here we have our web app where users write and publish articles. As you can see, the app has users, authors, and of course, articles. Currently, users can comment on articles, but we'd like to make an update so that only author-approved users can comment. First, we'll set up a project in Authzed. I've already created an organization for our company, and we'll add a new tenant. Tenants are just a logical grouping of the pieces that make up a permission system, and in our case, our tenant will represent our web app. Next, we'll create a client and a token, which will enable our web app to make API calls to Authzed. The token is a shared secret between our app and Authzed, so we'll copy this and keep it in a safe place for later. Next, we'll switch over to the Authzed playground, where we'll begin designing our permissions model. Authzed uses namespaces and relations to represent objects and how they relate to each other in your system. For our feature, we have two kinds of objects, article and user. We'll create them here. An article has an author and users who can comment, so we'll also create those relations now. Believe it or not, this is a simple but complete permissions model. If you'd like to learn about designing namespaces more in depth, check out our namespace development guide, which we'll link in the corner of this video and in the description below. Tuples represent concrete data in our system, and we can provide test tuples here on the playground to validate our model. A tuple takes the form namespace, object, relation, and then user. So this first namespace reads, Hello World, under the namespace article, is related to the user Alice via can comment. We'll add another tuple for the user Bob can comment on the article Zanzibar. Using our test data, we can assert things that we expect to be true and not true in our permissions model. We expect the user Alice to have can comment on the article Hello World. We also expect the user Bob to not have can comment on the same Hello World article. Are our assertions valid? Yes. Now that we feel confident that our permissions model fulfills our requirements, let's load it into our tenant, and then we can add some code to integrate it into our app. The share button gives us a permalink that we can use to copy and paste into our tenant, which will load the namespaces and our test tuples. Authzed provides clients for a number of languages, and since our app's backend is written in Python, we'll pip install Authzed. Looks like we already have it installed. And switching to my editor of choice, the first step to integrate with our app is to represent namespaces and relations in code. You can create classes, as I've done here, or define namespace mappings and relations directly in models if you use an ORM. I've added a helper method here to wrap user objects and a special relation named ellipsis. I'll link to documentation that explains ellipsis in more detail. The article model has the author and can comments relations, and for demonstration's sake, I've copied in our token from setup here. Definitely use proper configuration management to store and define this token for your app. And finally, a convenience method to get an Authzed client. Next, we'll begin letting Authzed know of relevant objects and relations by writing tuples using the client. We'll start by writing an author relation in our handler for updating an article. We'll import our namespace classes and our helper method to get the Authzed client. Now we'll add the write call itself. We initialize the components of the tuple. The article will use the slug, and the author will use the username of the current user. And then the create call itself. I've added dummy handlers for getting and granting permissions for an article. As you can see, the permissions handler currently hardcodes a canned comment permission. So if we view an article as the user Jake, we should see a comment box. Let's add a check call to this handler. It'll check if the article object has a user relation for the current user and only return canned comment if that's present. We create the tuple components again and add the check call. We haven't written any canned comment tuples yet, so if we refresh the article, the comment box should be disabled. Let's open the author's editor view of this article. I'll open a separate browser and log in as Sam. We have a form to grant comment permissions for a username. And by now, you're probably anticipating that we'll want to write a tuple for a canned comment relation in the grant permission handler. We follow a familiar pattern to write the create call. Flipping back to our browsers, we can see that Jake still doesn't have comment permissions on this article. But if we grant Jake that permission and refresh, see that the comment box is now available to him. Now if Jake comments on my article, I can go respond. Wait, my user doesn't have canned comment permission. I could go grant myself permission to comment on my own article, but this would be better modeled such that an author on an article can also comment. We'll go back to the Authzed playground to update our permissions model. We'll add a test tuple to represent Bob as the author for the Hello World article, and use a check watch to define a condition we want to work towards to become true. User Bob should have canned comment permissions on Hello World. Authzed's namespace definition supports unions, where we can define multiple user groups that make up the relation. The this keyword represents users with a canned comment relation, and we'll add the computed user set of the author relation as well. Now Bob, the author of Hello World, also is part of the canned comment relation. We'll save these updates and use the downloaded YAML file to update the namespaces in our tenant. If you recall, we write the author tuple in our update article handler, so if we save the article again in the editor view, Sam is written as the author relation on the article, and now is also included in the can comment check. I can now comment on my article. Notice we were able to update our permissions model without making any code changes. Using Authzed, we were able to model a permission system, validate its correctness, and integrate it into our web app. This was a simple feature, but I hope this was an interesting peek into how you might be able to use Authzed to add permissions to your app. We'll make the app code used in this video available for reference on our GitHub page. Authzed is available now, and you can learn more about the service at authzed.com.